Hi, I'm Ann Coulter. Welcome to my Substack. Today I'm interviewing someone I'm a huge fan of for his work in free speech, Greg Lukianoff of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, who wrote Coddling of the American Mind, and it's most recently The Canceling of the American Mind. Is that right, Greg?
Yep, with the great Ricky Schlott. It actually just came out on paperback with all new data, a new epilogue, a new appendix that includes the 2025 worst schools for freedom of speech, including Harvard, once again, landing dead last. And they earned it.
Well, for fun, could we start with that, which made me laugh so much?
Yeah.
Explain what the list is, how you rank them, and how Harvard ended up with a negative number.
Yeah. No, so this was a passion project of mine. After Coddling came out, I really wanted us to expand our research department at FIRE. And one of the things that we really wanted to do with it was come up with a really rigorous way to rank schools on how good they are for free speech. Because I take my social science seriously, and I didn't, people are always asking me to do this. And I'm like, I could tell you which some of the worst cases, but I don't have enough data there. But now we actually do the biggest survey of student opinion on what the campuses look like for free speech. This also includes things like, are you comfortable disagreeing with your classmates or your professor? Or on the other side, do you think violence is okay in response to freedom of speech? Uh, yeah, and shocking numbers I think the average is something like 36 think that at least in rare circumstances it would be. And it's like, no, the correct answer there is never.
Yes, I'm familiar with that frame of mind.
Yeah, exactly. Oh no, I know you are. Actually, I talked about. I have a TED talk coming out, and you're in it, by the way. Your situation at Cornell. So it's a giant survey. It's the largest database of professor cancellations, student cancellations, speech codes, and deplatformings, which also includes shoutdowns. Which, by the way, this has been the two worst years for shoutdowns on record, and is overwhelmingly. And I always say this, we're nonpartisan, but I always point this out. All but about three of those shoutdowns have been pro-Palestinian students doing the shoutdowns over the past 2 years.
Hmm.
So not much of a surprise there. And be clear, we're nonpartisan. We defend the pro-Palestinian people when they get in trouble,
Yeah.
without apologies, without throat clearing, but pointing out that they're relying a lot on freedom of speech and oftentimes not letting other people have it. It's something that I think bears repeating. So Harvard finished dead last 2 years in a row. First time getting our only negative score.
How
Um,
do you get a negative score?
Well, basically, you have to do really poorly on the surveys, and then you have to have a lot of incidents where you didn't handle deplatforming well, where you punish professors, because you get minuses for all of these. We never thought it would add up to a negative score, uh, and now they're actually so they got a negative, I think 10.69 2 years ago. They got like a negative 20 this past year, and I don't think you'll be shocked by who was right behind them.
Yale.
Nope. Columbia. Um,
Oh, because of the Palestinian stuff.
oh, so much stuff. Columbia has not handled a single thing right in I can't remember the last good decision Columbia has made. Although
Well,
actually,
they
maybe
were
today.
very polite to Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
They did point out he was a homophobe, um, which I thought was kind of funny because it's kind of like, yes, he is, but there's other things, there's other reason not to like this dude. So yeah, Harvard did really badly on it, which, by the way, leads to a funny situation. And I liken this to this time when I was a kid. There was this kid on my street who liked to run his mouth a lot, and I was at the time. I would later become someone who was more of a fighter, but at the time I was a pacifist, but I was a big guy. And there was this tough kid, Carlos, who Mikey had really angered, and Carlos was going to beat the hell out of Mikey. And to be fair, Mikey probably deserved it. And I remember I let Carlos punch me and kick me. I was also tough enough that I could take it. And then Carlos just kind of gave up. And I kind of feel like that's my experience over the past couple months defending Harvard, because Harvard is probably guilty, or okay, that's maybe going too far, but very likely could be found guilty of violating Title VI and Title VII, both for admissions practices and the way it treats Jewish students. But you have to follow a process before you eliminate all federal funding. So right now we're civil libertarians, so we're kind of like, no, this doesn't mean you get to make up new powers as the executive branch over private companies. So right now, we're taking a little bit of we're getting a lot of hate mail over the fact that I'm actually defending Mikey right now.
If I can make a suggestion,
Yes. Yes,
most
you
of
may.
the people you are defending have nobody else to defend them. I think Harvard's doing fine. They don't need you to weigh in.
Yeah.
I know you want to look like it's both sides, but there are
Yeah.
enough people who are actually having their speech crushed. What was the worst, it probably isn't one worse, but some of the worst incidents of speech suppression at Harvard?
I would say some of the most spectacular ones, certainly this was years ago, but Ronald Sullivan, like when they got him excluded from the dorms because he actually briefly represented Harvey Weinstein.
Okay.
And that one really angered me because I'm kind of like, I'm a lawyer, like it's like defending odious people and being willing to defend odious people is something that we actually think is kind of noble in some cases, like being willing to be that unpopular. Like, good. That's people need, you can't be, you need to defend the guilty. But then also there was a Roland Fryer incident, which was terrible. This
Mm-hmm.
he's a black scholar. He actually one of the thing that actually makes him the most different is he actually comes from a much poorer background than most people at Harvard, which is the class. As someone who went to Stanford, believe me, the class differences are the most dramatic things when you go to
Yes.
grad. And he did a massive survey on something that he actually thought was going to be really easy to show, that essentially unarmed black men are disproportionately targeted in police shootings. He did a massive study. He's a great statistician and economist, and he found that actually no. He basically said he thinks too many cops shoot too many people in the United States, but there isn't evidence that it's actually disproportionate in any way. And lo and behold, first of all, people encouraged him not to publish it. There was all sorts of pressure on him, all sorts of don't betray the movement, more or less type stuff. And of course, he's a man of great integrity. So he's like, no, this is true. So I'm going to publish it. And lo and behold, shock upon shock, within a short period of time, suddenly it came out that he actually told some blue jokes, I think at a Thanksgiving party, like a private Thanksgiving party, like a couple years before, and suddenly he's under investigation for Title IX. Now, up until recently, Title IX was the excuses of saying like harassment under Title IX was kind of like the trick that universities would pull all the time to like
Yes.
to people. And so the good news there, at least, is after they investigated him, after a couple of years, by the way, of this, they exonerated him. But guess who? One of the people who was involved in this whole thing?
Oh.
Claudine Gay. So definitely there was a. I think he was on Barry Weiss's, and he got asked about Claudine Gay, and his response was, "Karma's a mother," which I thought was pretty good. And then, of course, there's the Carol Hooven thing. And Carol Hooven's an absolutely lovely person, someone I'm personally friends with, a very sweet and brilliant person. And all she did was go on, she was promoting her book called Testosterone, called T, explaining that, yeah, actually, and she was very compassionate even in the way she said it, but we shouldn't pretend there's no difference between biological sexes. And next thing you know, there's, a campaign from the DEI, task force to get her in trouble. Students won't work her class, friends turn on her, and eventually she left Harvard. And interestingly, we don't actually even count her against Harvard because since she left voluntarily, but I think most people would leave under those circumstances, just for saying biological sex is real.
That's amazing. That's an amazing one. Which reminds me of something else you talked about that I wanted to ask you about. But I do want to get more cancellation stories outside of the academy because I gather that's where it started, but it seems to have really leapt beyond that. And everybody knows about, the bird watcher. But you have a lot more than that. But one of the things you've said is that all of this safetyism and the coddling is almost precisely designed to create psychological problems
Yeah.
in people. So could you explain that?
Yeah, this is something that, that comes from, I'm going to go a little serious for a second. I had a mental breakdown back in 2007, and the culture war was a big part of that. I've been doing this a lot longer than most people, and before political correctness kind of got back on everyone's radar, it wasn't obviously in the 90s, but certainly you were paying attention. But I was at Fire, and we defend people all over the spectrum, and I was, I was getting tired of being kind of hated for it. It's exhausting to do this all day long. And that and other factors. I was living in Philadelphia where I felt very lonely, all this other stuff. I got very depressed. And I had to be hospitalized. But as I was recovering, I was studying cognitive behavioral therapy, which is this way of like asking yourself, is this, thought that I have in my head like a mental exaggeration? Am I overgeneralizing? Am I catastrophizing? Am I engaging in sort of either or thinking? Everything has to be one thing or the other. And I noticed in my work, and this, by the way, transformed my life. Like I don't get depressions like that anymore. It absolutely saved my life. But I was noticing what I was seeing on campus is it seemed like all the administrators were kind of like implicitly through their actions telling students, do catastrophize, definitely overgeneralize. The professor were telling, like crazy, definitely blame, definitely discount positives, do all of these things that will make you miserable if you do them. But thank goodness in 2008, the students weren't buying it. And it was only in 2013, 2014 that I started noticing large numbers of students hitting campuses, demanding deplatformings, demanding people be disinvited, demanding new speech codes, demanding trigger warnings, but all framing it in a way that was filled with overgeneralization, catastrophizing, blaming, all of these things that will make you miserable. And so I approached my friend Jonathan Haidt, who was a new friend at the time, and said, like, listen, this is going to be a disaster for free speech on campus. It's going to be a disaster for academic freedom. But by the way, if the students actually believe this, they're going to be miserable. And, we kind of thought, Haidt and I kind of thought we'd see like a scholarly little, 3% decrease in mental well-being among young people. Woof. It was, the number of cancellations for professors skyrocketed and mental health, particularly on the left, plummeted, and it's continued to go like that for a long time.
You can watch complete episodes of Unsafe with Ann Coulter by subscribing to anncoulter.substack.com. That's anncoulter.substack.com. You can also listen to complete episodes for free at Ricochet.com. Choose Unsafe from the pull-down menu at the top of the page. That's Ricochet.com. Your home for civil center right conversation on the web.